Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another thrilling edition of Buck's Books. As always, I am your host, your best friend and closest confidant, Buck of Clan Wild, and joining us today is my attorney, Beefton Tiberius Duke. Yeah, hey buddy. Also occasionally regarded as Beefton Big Time. And today, I would like to talk about sorry, I got lightheaded there for a second. Today, I would like to talk about a book called Leaders Eat Last: Why Some Teams Pull Together and Others Don't, by New York Times bestseller Simon Sinek. Sinek. I think it's pronounced Cynic. But it's not spelled like Diogenes the Cynic. It's spelled Sinek, which you can clearly see because the book has probably been up on the side of the screen for like 10 seconds now. The reason I'm jumping right back into another book after posting Hollow yesterday is A, I have a little bit of free time. B, I was trying this screenless situation. Let me tell you the plan. The plan was that I was going to go without screens for the majority of Sunday, with allowances made for my Kindle, because it's a screen, sure, but it's a book. Like, I don't have paper books because I have a Kindle. So I'm not just gonna not read on the only day off I have in the week. That doesn't make any sense. And I had to do my cell phone, but limited, because I just did Duolingo. Nothing but Duolingo. And then all these texts came in, and it was actually something important, and money was involved. So I had to use those screens. And having invested that much already, I was like, well, may as well buck another book. What are you doing back there? Just hanging out? That's fine. So, today the book we'll be bucking is Leaders Eat Last, Simon Sinek. And this one, it's corporate. So, grain of salt. But it is one of the less evil and sickening corporate books I have read. I'm not a big business bro book guy. There's a lot of overlap between psychology and communications. I read a lot of psychology. I read a lot of pop psychology, unfortunately. And communications is just psychology but evil and gets laid. So all of these concepts translate directly across to one another. And Leaders Eat Last is perhaps the purest psychology I've ever seen applied to a business bro book, because they're actually talking about real neuroscience and not just meditate your way to better shareholder value. This is actually the idea that Sinek is trying to present in the book. Pretty much the main thrust of the book is that people quit jobs because of their immediate environment, not because of the jobs themselves. So it's the people they interact with or don't interact with, and it's the feeling of safety and inclusivity that you'll get at some jobs and then very few others. And he talks about the history of how this happened and how in the 90s, it was the early 90s, he blamed General Electric for it. One of the new CEOs of General Electric changed it from being about growing the company to growing an arbitrary measure of how much the company is growing, because that defined how much of a bonus the CEO got, which is immediately self-reinforcing. So the better the company does, the better the CEO does. But it has obviously since been exploited to maximize what the CEO takes home, and it's less important how well the company does by traditional metrics. So Costco is doing phenomenally. And Costco is one of the kinder, gentler companies. You know, they're fuzzier because they care about their employees. Apparently, the minimum amount of money you can earn at Costco is $20 an hour. And at the time of the writing, which was 2014, at the time of the writing, the federal minimum wage was just over $7. So, as contrasted to Walmart, it's the comparison that Sinek makes directly, because Walmart, half of their employees don't have health insurance benefits. 50%. Think about how many Walmarts there are. Think about how many people work at Walmart. And then divide that number in half. And that's how many of them receive health insurance benefits from Walmart. And I'm sure the benefits suck. Like, I'm sure they're bad. So this is sort of like the good and evil that he's throwing up, the chiaroscuro between Walmart and Costco. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What Sinek actually wanted to talk about was neurotransmitters. And I always want to talk about neurotransmitters. Is the thing you have to understand about me. If you want to have a conversation about neurotransmitters, you just day or night hit me up. I'll wake up. My phone's on silent, but I'll sense it happening and I'll get there. He talks about dopamine, of course, because we're addicted to dopamine. By definition, dopamine is what makes us addicted to anything. So he also sort of frames up this shift in how businesses run, how teams run. He keeps calling them teams because he's a business bro. How teams run as being more focused on immediate dopamine satisfaction. You know, the pleasure of getting that next accomplishment, the next achievement, because that's dopamine too. So he suggests that the new form of addiction in the business world is this addiction to performance. You do better and better and better, and the numbers reflect that you do better and better and better, but you're not necessarily doing it for the team. You're doing it because, I mean, a lot of time you get commission for it, but you're doing it to look out for number one. And there is this tendency in recent years to jump ship after 2 years on a job, because that will maximize your earning potential. And honestly, with the way inflation has been going, it makes a lot of sense. But it's interesting because he blames boomers. He blames boomers from getting away from oxytocin and more toward dopamine. So what he said about boomers was wild and kind of interesting. It was the idea that the baby boom facilitated this shift toward a sort of sense of self-serving narcissism, because prior to that you had people who were actually living through the Great Depression and people who were within their lifetimes involved in a world war. So at that time everything was very community focused, because that was what defined our survival. We stuck together or we starved in the streets, and then we stuck together or the Nazis won. The Nazis won. The Nazis won. There it is. The Nazis won. And then later, everybody gets home from the baby boom and from the war, and everybody's very happy. So you do what you do when you're happy, and then we have this baby boom. And the baby boom results in this whole generation of children, and their parents are like, okay, so now we have the opportunity to give them the life that we never had, which is all any parent really wants. And they're like, so we have access to all of these resources now because the wars are over, and we're not eating onion sandwiches and ducking shrapnel anymore. And at this point, we can really make the best lives for our kids. They don't ever have to go without. And they didn't. The boomers didn't. So they internalized this understanding that life is just the relentless pursuit of personal pleasure or achievement. What can I get? You know, it's not about us, it's about me. Me before we, I think, is the term that our boy Sinek kept using. So maybe the last name is kind of appropriate. And he says that the boomers really sort of epitomized this mentality. and went on to pass it down to the next generation, the Gen Xers. And the Gen Xers sort of had the same mentality. We get all. We get all of it. It is all available to us. And I mean, the Gen Xers were coming up in the 80s and 90s. So they did, greed was good. Everything was booming. The 90s, it was impossible not to run a business in the 90s. You'd accidentally make $1 million in the 90s. So Gen X decided in order to achieve that, they just worked real hard. That's what you do. So they worked real hard and were disappointed to find out that it was not the same world that they were raised to believe that it would be. And now we have the millennials who are just standing amid the ashes. Things are collapsing around us. Everything's in cinders. Eggs are $4 a dozen. Everything's in cinders. And the point that our man Sinek is trying to make is this is largely from that sort of self-serving boomer mentality. He's not a friend of the boomers, is Simon Sinek. What he was trying to explain here is dopamine is, we know what that is. That is the chemical of pursuit. It's not necessarily a chemical of pleasure, it's just a chemical of chase. But it is what makes us chase, under the mistaken assumption that achieving whatever we're chasing will bring us pleasure, which it usually won't. Pleasure is handled in another portion of the house. Dopamine just gets you moving, right? And he talks about serotonin, and serotonin is one of the very important chemicals for social bonding. It's one of the deciding factors to our social bonding. That along with oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is what actually makes you feel good. Oxytocin, enkephalins, endorphins. Those are pleasure. Those are the things that actually make life worth living. And oxytocin you get when you are bonding with other human beings. Pretty much exclusively. Or like a dog. Or maybe a cat. I don't know. Probably cats. But I maintain that is a malfunction of your own system. But dogs are basically human. Those things have souls. So you get, and it's interesting, they did studies that found that the oxytocin and dopamine release that you experience when looking at the dog, your dog that you love, the dog, yeah, you, I keep talking about you, come on over. Then don't. The dog experiences the same amount, well, maybe not the same amount, but the same type and same cascade of both oxytocin and dopamine, and presumably serotonin, when they're looking at you. So what you're feeling, what you quantify as love in yourself, the dog experiences the same feeling when the dog looks at you, right? So, oxytocin, enkephalins, and serotonin, and endorphins. Those are the ones that govern socialization for all intents and purposes. Those are the things that make us social animals, because it is immediately reinforcing to belong to a tribe, to belong to a team, to belong to a situation where you can trust the people around you and know that you have their best interest in heart and know that they have your best interest at heart. That sequence of events leads to this deluge of primarily serotonin. But because oxytocin is the kind of thing you get from orgasm or breastfeeding or being in love or dark chocolate, interestingly enough. You actually need to put in the legwork and bond. You need to bond for oxytocin and vasopressin. But vasopressin was not mentioned anywhere in this, and that's probably for the best, because vasopressin is mostly just the purview of rat studies. Oxytocin. He talks about that a lot, and he talks about the shift. Once upon a time, when people would be company men and they'd stay at the same place forever, they'd often stay at the same place forever because they trusted it. They felt that they belonged there. They felt a sense of community and communion with the people around them. They looked out for one another. He likens it to functional military platoon, and how they talk about like our commanding officer rather than the brass and stuff like that, because their immediate guy, the next one up, they count that guy as part of their squad, whereas these faceless officers, not so much. The rest of the brass, the rest of the next step up. And this is largely what has happened within companies in the past 30 years, especially 30, 40 years. No matter how many like cringy tech bro innovations they try to launch, the open office methods, and they'd bring your puppy to work and you'd sit on the yoga ball and you'd brainstorm sessions and all that crap. That doesn't work. That doesn't do the same thing. That doesn't get you the same sequence of neurochemicals that actually lead to a person feeling like they care about work. Increasingly, there are extrinsic motivators, which the research suggests don't really work long term. They work short term. That's why we'd work. That's the extrinsic motivator of having money and being able to not starve and die. But intrinsic motivation is what makes it feel like a calling. Intrinsic motivations are what makes you stick. And intrinsic motivations are built into companies like Costco. He used a whole bunch of other examples, but most of them I just sort of filtered right out because they were like hotshot corporations, which I suppose Costco is, but like investment firms and stuff like that. And my brain just released that as soon as it just passed through without touching the walls. So these places, they were more founded on building this community, building the sense of belonging, allowing for the development in their staff, in their teams, for serotonin and oxytocin, to feel like they belong to a tribe, and a tribe that they'd... Hotel Rwanda. How during what happened at Hotel Rwanda, like, I think it was like 30% of the deaths were hotel staff fighting to defend the clients. Imagine caring that much, you know? And same deal, because that company was known for going the extra mile for their clients, and the people who worked there identified so strongly with the company that they became an appendage of it like that, you know? Many of them lost their lives. So it's not necessarily saying that's a good thing. Because don't get me wrong, I can understand how quickly this can be perverted. You know, if we look at the typical power structure of corporate America, overwhelmingly, the upper echelons, they're disproportionately psychopathic. There is a higher rate of narcissism and antisocial personality disorder. The higher up you go, I hesitate to say in income, but certainly within business contexts, the higher you have climbed, the more likely it is that you exhibit antisocial traits. And that's not my opinion. The research backs that up. Robert Hare's Snakes in Suits. That's an entire book about psychopaths in corporate America. Robert Hare did the majority of the psychopath stuff before Martha Stout got involved. Oh, now I'm gonna have to put a whole bunch of little pictures of all these different books up. We'll get through it. Let's get back to the book at hand, The Leaders Eat Last. The idea is there's a difference between a manager and a leader. And what Sinek is pushing is that most of the world are now managers, and managers don't do anything except maintain status quo until status quo starts to deteriorate and drives the company into the ground, and the people along with it. Everyone goes down with that ship. Nobody wants to. As compared to leaders. Leaders eat last because they want to make sure that everyone else is accounted for first. The leaders are there trying to take care of their tribe. The leaders are there to try to ensure that everybody else has enough to eat before they take what they have to eat, because they feel a sense of responsibility for the people under them. Come on, man. So, the example that he gave of that was once again, military. Apparently in the Marines, the lower on the totem pole you are, the sooner you get chow. And there's a reason for that. That builds that sense of community. Or is supposed to. So, conceptually sound. I loved how it was like a paleo business book. I did. I don't have much practical application for a business book like this because I am not involved in any sort of corporations. Really. But the concept was interesting, and I really liked how they framed up the neurotransmitters and made it so accessible. Made it apply like that. Taught me about serotonin. I didn't know all those things about serotonin. I didn't realize it was so heavily involved in social dynamics like that. It makes sense that serotonin's involved in everything, but so immediately like that. And it confirms all my biases because I am completely on board with that community building thing and that returning to the shrub, my brethren situation. All told, it's a good book. If you cared about any of the things I just said, if you care about management, this is for managers. Ultimately, the book is for managers. I'm not a manager. It's not going to benefit me professionally, but if you are a manager, it will benefit you professionally. If you like neuroscience, it will be pleasant to read. That is today's offering. Thank you for coming through once again. I know the last one was very recent, but it was an automatically reinforcing stimulus because I put the last one up. I got another subscriber. So if I get a subscriber every time I put up a video, I'm just going to blast videos out. It's going to happen so fast. You did this. But yeah, if you like this, 100%, man, like, follow, subscribe. You know the drill. All right, see you next time.